Good evening. Today we are going to talk about CIF, which means cost, insurance, and freight. This presentation explains how CIF works in maritime logistics. CIF stands for cost, insurance, and freight. In this rule, the seller pays for the transport of the goods by sea. The seller also buys insurance to protect the goods. The transport is from the origin port to the destination port. SIF is only used for sea and water transport. It is not used for air, rail, or road transport. SIF is best for bulk cargo, liquids, or heavy machinery. These goods are usually loaded directly onto the ship. There is a problem with containers. The risk transfer when two goods are loaded in the ship, but containers arrive early to the port. So if something happens before loading, it creates confusion about responsibilities.
Hello. Mm, Now, moving on to slide 4, we are going to analyze a fundamental concept in international trade called the decoupling of cost and rates. As we can see in the graphic under CIF terms, there is a critical distinction between who pays and who is responsibility for the costs. The blue line shows that the seller pays to move the cargo all the way to the destination port. However, I look at the yellow line, the seller risks and much airlines, specifically at the origin port. The core issue here is that the fiscal risk is transferred to the buyer the exact moment the goods are loaded on board the ship. This means that if an item happens during the same transit, the buyer is the one who holds the risk, even though the seller already paid for the freight and insurance. Following that logic, let's look at slide 5, which breaks down the specific responsibilities of the seller during phase 1. To ensure a successful operation, the seller must manage these 5 key steps. First, packaging and marking. We must prepare the goods to withstand strict maritime conditions and ensure they are correctly labeled. Second, export clearance. The involves procuring all necessary licenses and paying the required export duties. Third, origin handling. The seller is responsibility for transporting the cargo to the port and paying the terminal handling charges. 4. Loading. We must ensure the goods are placed safely on board the vessel. Remember, as we saw in the previous slide, this is the exact point where the tricks transfer to the buyer. Finally, freight and insurance. The seller contracts the ocean carrier to the destination port and pays the insurance premium.
This slide explains what the buyer must do after the goods arrive at the destination. Receive goods. The buyer accepts the cargo at the destination port. Unloading. The buyer pays for unloading and terminal handling charges unless they were already prepaid. Import clearance. The buyer is responsible for paying import tax and handling custom paperwork. Onward transport. The buyer arranges and pays for transportation from the port to the final destination. This slide shows the relationship between the seller, the buyer, and the insurance company. The seller buys insurance policy and pays the premium. The insurance policy is transferred to the buyer. The buyer holds the risk and is responsible for filing claims if something goes wrong. The insurance company handles the claims.
The slide shows the my insurance requirement under SIF. The coverage must be at least 1% of the inbuilt value, ensuring full protection on the goods and extra costs. It is based on Institute Cargo Cruising C, which provides basic coverage for major risks like fires, exploitation of cheese adjacent. However, it does not cover minor damage or theft. The additional coverage must be negotiated if needed. The island explained the documentary say under SIF. The SIF key documents are the bill of lading, which in the transport contract and allows the buyer to key the ground. The ingredient points which prove coverage and the commercial inbound requirement for customers. The kit pump in the rates transparent and the cheat, but the right to claim the goods transparent with these documentaries. This island show the sale process. The seller paying in the cost and insurance and to the destination port, but the rates transferred and the arrangement for being the goods and cheats. Documented and or transferred and at a point allowed the buyer to keep the good. In summary, SIF gives charity to the buyer while seller manage transport and insurance.